needed infrastructure for mass transit. The question is, which of these plans do you support and why?
Mr. Holden?
Okay. I have problems with both plans, but I'm leaning toward at least the Move New York, but we're at a point here where we have to, Joe Loder wants the city to kick in $400 million, and the state, Cuomo, to kick in $400 million. That's a good start. But I think we should tax luxury condos because they are creating the overcrowding, and they are overburdening certainly our subways. So I think better than tax only the rich, you tax the developers that are building these high rises and really causing all the problems. And another way to start is that $2.5 billion that is coming from, for the BQX, that trolley along the river that the mayor is proposing. By the way, why do we need that? Do we need to spend $2.5 million on that? Or billion, I'm sorry, $2.5 billion on that? Do we need that? No, because there's a ferry over there. We should use our waterways instead of building these expensive projects. And we can't take care of what we already have, obviously. But I would bring back the commuter tax. That was gone away in a political battle in 1999. I would get the state officials to try to do that. That was like a tax of 0.45% on anybody outside the city coming in using our services. Now, that only costs, let's say you're making $84,000 a year, you would have to pay a total of $378 a year. And that was raising almost $1 billion a year. So just think of that money, $1 billion a year since 1999, what we could have put toward our subways. And I would also, one other thing, offer a tax incentive to companies that allow their employees to work at home at least once a week. And that's how you alleviate some of the overcrowding. Thank you.
Our middle-class families are tax burdened far too much. Therefore, I disagree with my opponent. I would not support a Move New York or a congestion pricing tax. We certainly need to invest more in our infrastructure. Our MTA is at a breaking point. Every day we hear about a new subway problem or delays. You can't rely on our buses, you can't rely on our trains. But to tax our middle class families is not the way to answer the burden of that money needed for our infrastructure. Now, the other question was, do you support a tax on people who make over $500,000? I would be open to that. Not many of my constituents make that much money. However, I need to be assured by the MTA that the projects getting funded are going to benefit the community that I represent. Most of Queens is a transportation desert. I recently put forth an idea of reactivating the Lower Montauk line for commuter service. Now that's an opportunity to provide transit and to provide real economic development to communities in need, the communities that I represent. It's supported by Community Board 5 and every community board that the right-of-way runs through. It is projects like that we must push both the mayor and the governor to support. And by the way, I am supported by the governor, Andrew Cuomo, and I'm committed to working with him to find the solutions to fix the problems that are plaguing our MTA.
Question 3 is Ridgewood area zoning. The entire greater Ridgewood community, and that includes Middle Village, Maspeth, and Glendale as well, is experiencing a major real estate boom. The Department of Buildings lacks capacity to enforce existing regulations and to manage new applications. This has been leading to developer abuses of excessively permissive zoning in our communities. These abuses threaten the character, look, and feel of our unique streetscapes and our neighborhoods. Additionally, the excessively permissive zoning acts as an additional developer incentive to dislocate existing tenants from their residences. RPOCA has developed a plan to conform the zoning of the greater Ridgewood communities to preserve the existing character of our neighborhoods, especially as to height and density. Question is, will you support RPOCA's zoning initiative to adjust the zoning in our communities to preserve the existing character of our communities and to reduce developer incentives to dislocate existing tenants?
Thank you for that question. The quick answer is yes, of course I would support an effort to rezone and downzone to protect the quality and the character of our community. I took office in 2009, and one of the first items on my agenda was rezoning Maspeth, Middle Village, and Glendale. And we did just that to protect the character of the 1 and 2 family homes. We worked that same year to start our historic preservation of the Ridgewood community. And I'm proud to say that working together with Ridgewood property owners, we have the largest historic district outside of Manhattan. Historic district protects the more than 1,000 buildings that fall within this zone. But I'm committed to working with you to expand that zone and to work with any other area of property that doesn't have the protection that we need to keep the building within the character and contextual nature of our community. Thank you.
That downzoning that she's talking about, when she took office, that was already in the works for 4 years. I led the downzoning in Middle Village and Maspeth. We got 75 volunteers from city, worked with city planning, identified every house in the neighborhood, and it took us over a year to do that, but we did it. We got it through city planning. City planning went through the whole channels, and eventually, when Elizabeth Crowley came in, 2 months later, it was, again, downzone. So we're at a point where she's taking credit for that, but we did all the legwork. We did all the heavy lifting. So I love that, you know, when politicians do that. But I'll support any zoning plan that comes from the community. And the Ridgewood property owners, I mean, are an amazing group, and I know a lot of the leaders of it. They've been doing it for years, and they know zoning. And I will support any downzoning that comes through the neighborhood and the civics. And of course, when developers, you know, they knock down these 2-family homes or they build larger ones, everything goes up, the rent goes up, and even around them the rent goes up. So we're seeing that as a constant problem in this area and around actually every area. And preservation is very, very important. And it's kind of been stalled. I wish it was more in the pipeline, and if I'm the council person, I will certainly enact that and work with the Ridgewood property owners and all the neighborhood groups. Thank you.
And strangely enough, the next question, number 4, the category is historic preservation. Only 40% of the nearly 3,000 federal and state historically landmarked buildings in Ridgewood have been similarly, landmarked by New York City. 14 districts remain. In the past, landmarks always added a new district to work on while they were completing an existing district. In this manner, there was a local progression of one historic district always being in the quote-unquote hopper. This process has now come to a complete halt, with nothing new pending and no commitments from landmarks to continue this process. The question is, well, actually it's a 2-part question. 1, will you actively advocate to complete the designation process for all of Ridgewood's remaining districts? And 2, what can you do to get city landmarks to complete the historic designation process for 14 other districts, the remaining 14 other districts? Bob?
Like I said before, I certainly support that. I think there should have been more in the pipeline, and I hope to work with this group and other groups around the city, around the district, to enact that. And you know, by the way, my opponent promised to landmark transfiguration when she came into office. Didn't happen. Also, some Middle Village homes near Juniper Valley Park. That didn't happen. So we got promises. Also, St. Saviour's, which we were trying to save, and we did save the remnants of it. We have obviously the wood and everything in trailers in storage, and we'd like to get that going. And because we have no landmarks in Middle Village, Maspeth, you have great landmark housing here. However, we have to do more to preserve what we have. And I would, when I come into office, I'll definitely get things going and try to, work with the property owners, like I said before, and get this right in the works and have a plan, a master plan as to how we want this to proceed. And so this is an important problem because if you preserve the neighborhood, the character of the neighborhood, you preserve the neighborhood, you preserve the rents the way they are. If you start overbuilding, that's what happens. And again, we saw that all over the city. You can't get around the city anymore. You can't drive anywhere because of the overdevelopment. What happened in Williamsburg? I don't want it to happen here. What happened in Long Island City? My daughter lives there. It's a disgrace. They're overbuilding. And look at Queens Boulevard. What's happening there? High rises going up. That's why you can't get anywhere around the city. Thanks so much.
Earlier, I mentioned the achievements in landmarking the district, and I'm going to do that in answering your question. A short answer to the question is yes, of course. We've achieved a lot, but there's still more to do. I do have to address something my opponent said earlier. He talked about the downzoning I did when I was in office for less than a year. I prioritized it. He did say he was working on that downzoning for 40 years, and he's been a civic leader for 25 years. But yes, the truth of the matter is, we were able to achieve a goal that he tried with other elected officials to achieve for generations, if it was over 45 years, and we were able to accomplish that in the city council. The only person who's able to downzone or landmark, it takes three bodies. It takes the city, borough president, and the city council all to agree. And Bob Holden hasn't been in the city council and wasn't in the city council when that happened. So when it comes to taking credit for other people's achievement, the only person on stage that does that is Mr. Holden. Then he refers to St. Saviour's. Well, St. Saviour's is in a trailer. And when Mr. Holden wants to find out who is the reason, the main person behind the reason for that historic church for being in a trailer and not sitting on the property where it stood for over 100 years, he could also look in the mirror. Now, when it comes to making historic districts, yes, we have the largest historic district outside of Manhattan, here in Queens, in Ridgewood, and we're not finished yet. Another achievement in historic preservation was the Forest Park Carousel. For 40 years, the Landmarks Commission told the community I represent, we don't landmark amusements. But guess what? We got that landmark too. Thank you.
Question number 5 relates to the Department of Buildings. The Department of Buildings appears to be unwilling or unable to enforce code and zoning regulations as well as other related city ordinances. RPOCA has requested that the DOB take action to issue violations and stop work orders on vacated buildings with known violations, with no apparent results after many months. Further, the DOB appears unable to manage or control predatory or abusive practices engaged in by overly aggressive real estate developers in Ridgewood and elsewhere within the neighboring communities. New city council ordinances to address these issues won't help if the Department of Buildings Enforcement remains unwilling or unable to use its powers to right violations. Two-part question. What can you do to bring greater numbers of enforcement staff to the Department of Buildings or otherwise improve their focus on code and zoning enforcement? And do you support the city council legislation to establish a new office of tenant advocacy within the Department of Buildings? Mr. Holden?
Yes, I support the tenants group, obviously, in the Department of Buildings, and actually, the problem with getting access to buildings to DOB, they can gain access, and they're starting to do that. They have a new program. It's limited access. They come with a police officer, and they can ring your bell, and they can get in. You don't need an affidavit now. So there are programs that they're doing, and they've done it in our neighborhood. When there is a big problem with a basement apartment or illegal conversion that's causing major problems in the area. We've had some of those with crime, high crime, and so forth. And I actually worked with Bob Lamandry. He was a DOB commissioner. I discovered on Craigslist that they were selling apartments. So I texted and I called him and I said, Commissioner, why can't you have undercover DOB guys look at Craigslist and just visit those places, because they're gonna let you in. You're answering a Craigslist ad. And guess what? 2 months later, Bloomberg announced that they're doing that. They had undercover people going in there. That's simple. Airbnb is another one. They could do it on there. They're advertising illegal apartments. So why can't DOB get in there? That's easy. You and I could do it. So I suggested, and the manager said, that's genius, Bob. It was so obvious. So I don't understand why they couldn't do it. And by the way, what she mentioned before about the downzoning, I had to walk her through that in her first 2 months. I went to city planning with her and had to explain everything to her about the downzoning that we worked on. So, and the thing about St. Saviour's, historic districts gave me an award for saving St. Saviour's. I saved it. We raised $100,000 in 30 days and removed it piece by piece. And for her to say it's my fault that it's not rebuilt when she didn't supply the funding, that's got to be an absolute disgraceful state.
We won't have any responses from the audience, please. This is not the debate as they used the improper word. This is what Bob wants and what Elizabeth wants, and we don't want anybody doing any stomping and jumping. Thank you.
One more thing for the candidates. We're gonna alternate, okay? One minute. And then she goes and then you go and then you go.
Okay. First, before I answer that question, I'm going to just respond to the accusation my opponent made. When I took office, St. Saviour's was already in a container. The previous council member had gotten a pledge from the property owner to save that church and make it a community center. But that wasn't good enough for Bob Holden. He didn't want that to become a community center, and whatever plans he had for it, the end result was that that church, historic church, was taken down, and I wasn't council member yet. He fought against the plan that could have saved it. End of story for that. It's too bad. It's a real disappointment. However, now I'd like to address the question about the Department of Buildings. Mr. Holden is right when he says there has been greater enforcement. In fact, over the past 4 years, the Department of Buildings has expanded staff by 30%. If you see something out there, say something. Let us know. If one of your neighbors is breaking the rules, or if you see substandard construction happening without permits or something that looks illegal, please let us know, or call 311. We will make sure the Department of Buildings responds. They do, because we've had situations where 2 years ago there was a big explosion, a gas explosion in Manhattan, and we had to pass legislation making it a criminal activity. Not only, and in the past there was civil penalties for operating without licenses, and one of these bills I authored myself to make sure that not only people need to be licensed in a master plumber in order to do gas work, and licensed as a master electrician in order to do electrical work, because it's a public safety hazard. And now, if you find companies or people doing this work without the proper licenses or permits, it could be punishable by up to 1 year in jail and a significant penalty. And that wasn't in place before, and I was the council member who authored both those bills. Now it was. Thank you.
A quieter note. The category is senior citizens. You'd figure they gave it to me. The question and the background. Seniors in Ridgewood and Glendale are experiencing the ill effects of gentrification as the non-rent stabilized buildings are sold and rents are hiked by new landlords. Question, how can seniors protect themselves, and what options are your officers pursuing to increase affordable housing options for seniors?
Okay, I'm going to answer that one first. Just this summer in the city council, we worked with the state legislature to increase SCREE benefits, and those are tax exemptions for seniors who are either homeowners or live in an apartment. And depending on income, in the past it was only up to $38,000, but we've increased that by nearly 100%, really close to 80% increase. That your income could be up to $58,000 a year, and you could qualify for this tax abatement, which ultimately us in the council want to make sure that our seniors are able to stay in the communities they live in and not have to experience gentrification or a high burden of living costs. Additionally, the city council also funds, for those who have an income of less than $50,000, legal representation in housing courts. Now, your chances of getting evicted greatly decrease when you have an attorney representing you. And this is important not only for our seniors, but all families making under $50,000 a year, because we have such a crisis on our hands with homelessness. So those two areas we've looked into, we've been able to expand, we're committed, as well as making sure the word gets out there. You know, record number of funding I've put into our senior centers. Right here where we are tonight, this is Ridgewood Older Adult Center, and we also have the Peter Cardilla Senior Center. Ridgewood is lucky and blessed to have 2 senior centers. And the people in the senior centers know the rights that our seniors have, and they're often the first person or the first people that our seniors turn to. So we are working closely with our senior centers to not only keep them fully funded at record numbers. Centers are getting nearly $100,000 a year in the city council. In the city, we also put together $22 million to support all of our centers in the city. We called it the Year of the Seniors in the city council. Thank you.
Of course, we have to do more for our seniors, and you know, the mayor is good at trying to. He's really trying to do something about. He says he is about the homeless problem, and they want to build homeless shelters everywhere. But nobody talks about senior housing. I mean, how many facilities do we have in this district? Not many. And I have a 93-year-old mother that I'm taking care of because there's no facilities close that I can really trust. So what I have proposed is that we expand the senior rent credit, which will keep them in their homes. But you know, just going around the neighborhoods in campaigning and knocking on doors, so many seniors need help. They live alone. They're a 92-year-old woman. The steps are cracking it. We need to really get in there and help these seniors. They don't deserve to live like this, and they have an old house. It's falling apart, so we really need to really focus on that. I would have my staff go door to door and really see what we can do to help each particular senior and really fix up their apartment, get volunteers, work on a program where we can help them really, and not just in senior centers, but actually where they live.
Question 7 is a quality of life question. Rents are rising, illegal evictions are taking place, and many residents are worried that they will be priced out of their own neighborhood. What are your specific recommendations for maintaining our communities as a neighborhood for working class residents and families?
I believe that's me now. My first?
Yeah.
Bob's turn.
Bob.
She got 2, she's getting 2 now. You go,
Oh, okay.
Councilman.
I don't want to break any rules. Thank you. Okay, so earlier I mentioned that not only our seniors, but every New York family that makes under $50,000 is guaranteed legal representation if they need it in housing court, which is helping to keep our families in their homes. What do I do for the quality of life for Ridgewood and how important that is to me as your council member? I at some point just noticed Bob Monahan walk into the room. Bob Monahan runs the Greater Ridgewood Youth Council. In the past couple of years, working closely with my colleague who's here tonight, Assemblymember Miller, we've doubled their capacity to serve families in Ridgewood and surrounding communities. Not only did they open up 1 center, but 2, with over $4 million to acquire and renovate the space from the city council. I was able to work with my colleagues to get that funding to make Greater Ridgewood Council be the center that our families could depend upon when it comes to pre-K or after-school programs or summer youth. That's just one example. Investing in our parks throughout the district, I've invested nearly $30 million, and I've spread that fairly. And Ridgewood is the beneficiary of at least 2 of those projects. Evergreen Park on the border of Ridgewood, and also Rosemary Park, which is not far from here. Both of those playgrounds, one got over $5 million investment, the other over $3 million. When it comes to investing in parks or community centers, that's how you're able to help our young families get ahead, making the community that they live in more desirable, protecting them from being evicted illegally, and making sure that if they have to work those extra hours, they can turn to a center like Greater Ridgewood for the after-school program. Thank you.
Well, the real way to preserve the quality of life in the neighborhood is obviously zoning and landmarking, because that would actually keep the neighborhood the way it is and then try to improve it from within. But there's a lot of things, liquor licenses, for instance. You know, we're seeing that in Ridgewood, a lot of bars opening up. We don't need to go bar hopping, and we need more actually a neighborhood place to go, not all these bars, too many bars. So I, as chair of public safety on the community board, I fought to expand the liquor license applications on the board, and they agreed and they did it, and it's actually working. So we should turn down all these bars and liquor, joints and hangouts. We shouldn't have Ridgewood like that. This should be a really nice family town. So, and I think one place where I differ greatly from Elizabeth, because she actually tried to do this and actually called a civic leader in last year or 2 years ago. She wanted to increase the manufacturing areas, allow like affordable housing, build high rises next to railroad abutments and in manufacturing zones. Preserve the manufacturing zones in our neighborhoods, and that creates jobs. Manufacturing is coming back, and we need to have that, and we need to preserve it, and not build high-rise apartments to make it more crowded. That's how you preserve a neighborhood. She actually wanted to build in the railroad zone, and I found that offensive. I said, we just downzoned years ago, and now we're going backwards, and we want to build affordable housing in railroad abutments and manufacturing areas. Ridiculous.
The next question, category is tree planting, and the question and the background are as follows. Ridgewood Property Owners has been an active and consistent advocate for the replacement and maintenance of street trees in our communities. Councilman Antonio Reynoso has committed to obtaining funding for 300 trees for each fiscal year he is in office, and he has so far been good to his word. Question. Are you willing to match Councilman Reynoso's tree commitment in District 30 going forward?
I'll not only match it, I'll double it. I'm with Paul Kersner on this. Mr. Ridgewood, he's planted, thousands of trees. That's his legacy. And look how Ridgewood looks. It's beautiful. Tree-lined streets are so much better than concrete all over the place. So I'll match it and double it if we can. Certainly do that. But when I took over as civic president, Juniper civic president in 1990, Paul Kersner I found out they had a tree program, and I went to him and I said, "Where is Paul, by the way? Let me just, I want to see his face." Yeah. I had to get online, you said, because your priority was Ridgewood, and I understood that. But what I did is I called Parks and I said, "Can I make a tree form, and can I put it in my magazine so we can get trees in Middle Village and Maspeth?" And I did. I planted 300 trees that first year, and Paul didn't know about it. I don't know how he found out later. But I see and I guess Paul feels the same way. I see trees that I planted, and then in storms when they come down, it really hurts. But there's trees all over the Middle Village and Maspeth that I planted because I went door to door alone and just logged where I think a tree should go. I did get some flack from residents who said, "I don't want a tree in front of my house because I have to clean up the leaves." So I said, "Well, it's not your property, first of all, it's city property. And trees make the neighborhood look better, and it's healthier, and it cleans the air, and it's so, it makes the area cooler. Because you go by railroad abutments and you see all the trees, and it's so much cooler by the railroad because there's so many trees. So I've done that, and I'm telling Paul for the first time, but I think he kind of remembers that I did that. And we did it until a point where we didn't have to do that anymore because we had 311. But Paul is magnificent on that. That's his legacy, and Ridgewood is his legacy. But he did plant thousands of trees, and we have a better neighborhood for it. Thank you, Paul.
Since being in the council, I've allocated over $1 million over, I've allocated funding to plant over 1,000 trees. So it gets confusing when you think about how much money it costs to plant those trees, but each of those trees can go anywhere from $2,000 to $3,000. The vast majority of the trees that have been planted in the council district that I represent have been planted right here in Ridgewood, working closely with your property owners association. We've been able to get record number of funding for capital projects through parks. And this wasn't always the case. So every year, thank goodness, under this current leadership, we've been able to get $5 million each to allocate for various different projects. And I've been engaging the community more and more. We have something called participatory budgeting. And if you'd like to know more information, Carolina on my team is here, but not to mix too much, but we're out there trying to get ideas from everybody in addition to just planting trees. Trying to get ideas on how else to best spend the money that the city council is allocated. Prior to that, a lot of the prior leadership in the council, they gave out funding through political ways. But since I took on this role with the current speaker, everybody gets the same allotment of money. And last year, of the $5 million, I allocated $3.3 million to the community to decide. God willing, we still are in good economic times and we're able to get funding like that. My commitment to Ridgewood and Ridgewood's trees will be strong. Thank you.
Let me just take 1 minute. If anyone wants to ask a question, raise your